Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for your time, and hopefully everybody's back in and all rested from break. And we are blessed to have Ashley Ruth and Rita Evans from PHEAA here, and they are going to tell us a little about the state grant and the various special programs that PHEAA's offer. So take it away, ladies.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Like Melissa said, my name is Rita Evans. I'm a technical assistant specialist with the Department of PA State Grant and Special Programs. And with the department, what I do is essentially communicate to our post-secondary institutions, our community partners, and our community employers, and try and explain to them the kinds of things that they will need in order to best process the fee administered programs. I am here with my wonderful co-presenter, Ashley, and I will allow Ashley to introduce herself and tell a little bit about what we do.
Sure. Hey, everyone. So very nice to be able to speak with you all this morning and talk a little bit again about what it is that we do here PHEAA in the State Grant Special Programs Department. So sort of what Rita and I have on deck for you all is just a little bit of an overview of the various programs that we all work with. Rita and I specifically, though, within our team of folks, work to kind of develop all of the resources that you may refer to as you begin to work with these programs or work with students and families on behalf of these programs. So whether it's some of the virtual sessions that we offer for financial aid administrators or even some of the print resources you may find on PHEAA.org. Typically, Rita and I have a hand in developing those for you all, but even for the community partners that we work with that we'll talk a little bit about here today. So Rita's going to kick things off. It's kind of weird we're sharing a computer today, so we'll kind of slide left and right here as we, switch spots. But again, so Rita's going to kick things off, and we'll talk a little bit about everything. And if you have questions, feel free to send them in, and we'll make sure to leave a few minutes at the end to answer any questions you guys may have. So Rita, all yours.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And one of the things we were talking about just before we initiated the session was that both Ashley and I have attended the Don Raley Institute. We have had the pleasure of learning more about the federal process and how financial aid works on the federal level. So hopefully all of you will have had the same wonderful experience that we have both had in attending Don Raley. Also, we've had the pleasure of being invited back year after year to talk to all of you about our different programs that we administer here at PHEAA. So thank you, Melissa, and thank you all for the Don Raley team for inviting us back. So before we get into the programs themselves, we do want to highlight just a few things about PHEAA itself. PHEAA, the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, is a quasi-state agency that is principally developed to provide access to education for students and families that reside here in Pennsylvania. Now, we have several different business lines that we operate under, some of which are principally to support the public service mission of our agency, like our department, which is the PA State Grant and Special Programs Department. So in our department, we work directly with the funding, the free funding that we offer for students and institutions here within our Commonwealth. Now, in addition to PA State Grant and Special Programs, another one of the business lines that operates under the PHEAA name is PA Forward Private Student Loan Program, which is a relatively new program that PHEAA launched in order to provide additional funding for those students who still have a gap between, what it is that they can receive on the federal and state level and the cost of their education. So we initiated the PA Forward Private Student Loan Program to cover that gap, particularly for our Pennsylvania students and for some students in a few of the other states surrounding Pennsylvania. Now, we also operate under American Education Services as a commercial servicer for our FFELP loans. There are still some commercial FFELP loans out there, which we still do service. There are also some of those a little bit older alternative loans like My Rich Uncle, MRU loans that we also still service. And then under Fed loan servicing, once most of the federal loan servicing or the federal loans actually came underneath the U.S. Department of Education to provide services for, we actually became a contractor with the Department of Education to service those direct loans. We also service federal FELP loans under Fed Loan Servicing as well. And then finally, our newest venture is Averio, where we provide digital solutions to different financial aid entities where we sell software as a service or platform as a service, so that they don't have to come up with their own software or their own platforms. They can use what we have developed in order to process student aid at those particular organizations. So all of our commercial ventures, we use the profits to support all of us here at PHEAA, not just pay for the operations, because we don't take out operational fees from all of our different products, including the loans, but we use the funding that we get from all of these lines of business in order to support the operations and to pay back into our public service mission, which you'll see here in just a few slides. One of the things that we wanted to mention was the announcement of our mission, vision, and our core values. Now, we have been in the process of developing these statements over the course of the last couple of years, just so that we could communicate the picture that we're trying to paint here at PHEAA as an entity that is striving to provide affordable access to higher education. Now, a lot of you probably know about the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, but some of you may not know that we actually contribute funds to the state grant. We also pay for assisting students and families with navigating the financial aid world, whether it's, submitting to FAFSA or having financial aid nights with our access partners. We have online resources for them as well, which we do, take the responsibility of paying for through the revenue that we generate from our business lines. We also try to provide those low-cost financial aid solutions with our PA Forward line and educate students on financial literacy with our You Can Deal With It. So, all of these things are kind of encompassed within our mission, and that makes it so that we can actually reach our vision, which is to be a leader in higher education and higher education technology. So Pennsylvania does stand out amongst all of the different states within our nation as one that values education and puts that forth as a priority within our Commonwealth. So in order to kind of align all of those things to what it is here that we do, we have to come up with some sort of value, some sort of perspective, and our perspective is that, we are all customers of this agency, not just you guys as, financial aid administrators, but our students, our families, our employers, even us as employees. We have the perspective of not just being employees here, but also customers, where our agency feels that it should serve us, whether it's through training, whether it's through, our personal professional development, and all those different areas. And this, demonstrates the commitment that our agency has toward respect and inclusion. We have initiated a number of different diversity initiatives. So, we have wanted to make transparent to not just agency employees, but to our community at large, that this is a part of the values for our agency. Because first and foremost, we are all citizens of our Commonwealth, and we want to represent ourselves as such, both on an agency level and on an individual level. And that makes it so that we can be sure to, evolve as things change within our world, within our country, and again, within our Commonwealth. So just to give you some background and some perspective on what it is that we do and who we are, we did want to tell you a little bit about PHEAA. Now, when we're talking about state grant and special programs, we are divided into 4 different business units, and we kind of work together in order to make sure that all of our programs are serviced efficiently. Ashley and I work within the program management and client services area, and we provide external training. However, we work hand in hand with a team of analysts that serve to operate the programs. They send out disbursements for the programs. They, collect any kind of additional information, make policy decisions regarding the program. All those things happen in program management and client operations. Now, when it comes to institutional participation, our institution compliance and eligibility team, they take care of primarily, reviewing the state grant program applications by those institutions, and then taking a look on the back end to confirm that all of our institutions and community partners, our employers, are adhering to the policies, the regulations, and the legislation set forth for our programs. So, just to make sure that we are all aligned with our vision with regard to program management, they double check and let everybody know, hey, look, these things are misinterpreted. These things could use, a little bit more of an eye to them. So we definitely value our institution compliance and eligibility team. We also have a great deal of respect for our research and policy analysis team, a team that actually very affectionately refers to as our whiz kids, because when it comes to the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, in order to keep the funds flowing, instead of taking a look at what we get and then trying to figure out how much money to give out, what we do is try and figure out first, based on what the Commonwealth would be able to provide us in funding, what we would be able to supplement in funding, how much we will be able to give all our students. And they do all of that statistical research and planning, and then continue to support us, amongst our special programs as well, making sure that we're making policy decisions that reflect what the statistical data is. And then finally, the team that you probably have the most interaction with, which is the Program Integrity and Shared Support Services team. They are principally comprised of our customer service staff. So if you're calling with a student and you call the student line, you're talking to Program Integrity and Shared Support Services. Just like if you were to call and talk and ask questions, or send an email and ask a question about program policy, this is who you're talking to. In addition to all of that, we also have some other dedicated members of staff that do quality assurance for our customer service, that handle making sure that policies and procedures are communicated effectively and provided to all staff. So that's pretty much who we are here in the PA State Grant and Special Programs Department. We are here in order to make sure that both students and schools have the opportunity to take advantage of Commonwealth-funded programs, so that we can provide access to education for our Pennsylvania students. Now, these are going to be the programs that we're going to talk about today. Again, we've divided them into the student-facing programs and institution-facing programs. A number of you may be more familiar with, some of our student-facing programs, knowing that, PHEAA gives money to students, gives money to kids. But what you might not know, and what we will get into today, is that we also provide funding to supplement and to support our participating post-secondary institutions as well. So we're going to talk through all of our programs, starting with what Ashley has also referred to as our flagship program, which is the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, the reason why essentially we're here today. So back in 1965, when PHEAA was created, the Pennsylvania General Assembly also created a grant program for Pennsylvania students. It's one of the oldest programs that we service and operate here. And when we initially launched the program, we were able to give out $2.2 million to 6,500 students. Now, if you look over the years, we have certainly grown and evolved, changed all of our different policies to try and keep pace with the financial aid world and the administration of financial aid products. So we have grown and we have changed throughout the years, including absorbing distance education into our requirements for students and schools who participate in the program. Now, in our most recently almost closed out year, the 2021 academic year, or 2021 award year, we were able to amass $350 million between the Commonwealth appropriation, the federal stimulus, CARES Act funding, and a PHEAA supplement in order to, give that out to students who met the criteria and are attending institutions that also meet participation criteria. So essentially, when it comes to participation, primarily, we focus on providing funding to Pennsylvania schools. The only schools that we really send funding out to are those nonprofit institutions that are in states where those funds from those states and their grants are able to come here to Pennsylvania to pay their students to enroll at our institutions. So otherwise, we're principally focusing on our Pennsylvania schools, and there are some, hurdles to climb through in order to receive funding under the PA State Grant Program, including state board approval, accreditation, anti-discrimination codes, and making sure that that institution has programs of study where students can enroll and receive funding for the program. So what we're looking to do with the Pennsylvania State Grant Program is provide funding to students who are needy Pennsylvania students and who meet certain other criteria. One of the biggest criteria is that they need to submit that annual FAFSA. So we have a couple of deadlines that are available for students, depending on what type of institution they are attending and whether or not they're a renewal or a first-time applicant. So students will submit their FAFSA every year so we can gather all of that information regarding where they live, what their income was, in prior year, who their parents are, whether or not they meet the age requirement or other requirements for dependency, all that stuff. We get a lot of it from the FAFSA. We also get information for eligible students on what we call the State Grant Form, or SGF, and that is an application just for first-time students, and it lets us know a couple of other things, like what high school they graduated from, and a few other items that we use in order to determine eligibility for the program. Now, in addition to those two pieces of application, the final piece that I wanted to mention is that there is a separate and different application for students who want to receive funding in the summer. So keeping in mind as you go back to your campuses, we do offer PA State Grant Program funds for the summer, as long as the student submits the application by the deadline. Now, one of the important key factors regarding the Pennsylvania State Grant Program as a flagship program is that PA State Grant eligibility on an institution and student level may also impact, or will also impact, eligibility for some of our special programs. So we're going to talk through the PATH program, the State Work Study program, and the IAG and Ready to Succeed programs as well. I think I haven't moved enough, so the lights kind of turned out on me, but we'll get into all of those programs a little bit more, and you can see how the Pennsylvania State Grant Program eligibility factors into those as well. A few of the other state grant requirements, again, Pennsylvania residency for our students, high school graduation or the equivalent. They also must be enrolled as undergraduate students at approved institutions, enrolled in approved program of study, enrolled at least half-time. If they're at a non-headquartered and domiciled school, taking at least 50% of their curriculum in the classroom. And we do have a maximum number of grants that we issue to each and every student, and that's a lifetime maximum. Another one of the big ones for state grant is the satisfactory academic progress check. A little bit different from the federal check, but we maintain that this is the best one for our Commonwealth. And then students cannot be in default or pending default on their federal loans, as well as any of the private grant to loan programs that we offer and that we service here at PHEAA. So the NETS program, EAP, and NFEP, which we'll also talk about later, they are grant to loan programs that if students are in trouble with them, then they're not going to have state grant eligibility. So here is our processing year. It's quite detailed on our workflow. Essentially, it walks through each stage of processing for us, for you, for the students, gives you a good idea of what's happening essentially in October. And for the 21-22 year, we're talking October 2020, the FAFSA opens. We open up the SGF as well. Students who report that they are Pennsylvania residents, then they are linked to the SGF and then would complete that in order to have state grant processing. We start processing students' eligibility as soon as we have information for them, and then allow you as institutions to be able to see that information on file. We allow you also to go in and start making changes to anything that the students are reporting or that we have tried to calculate as far as eligibility is concerned in November. We take some time throughout the year to collect some additional information regarding awarding, including the Pell schedule when it's released, your costs in the March-April timeframe. And then in April, our board of directors actually vote on the formula used to determine students' award values for the upcoming year. We have the first application deadline for students in May, and then one of the biggest milestones within our process is when the Commonwealth budget passes, which generally is in July, because right after the Commonwealth budget passes, we announce final awards and begin dispersing funds for schools on students' behalf. Then we have a couple of other due dates and deadlines in there, including when the summer application comes out, which comes out in March, preceding that particular summer. We also have the reconsideration deadline, which is the point in time in which students must have information submitted that would impact their state grant eligibility. Again, summer application deadline, summer reconsideration deadline, and then things kind of end and start all over again for the very next year. So this kind of gives you an idea of how things flow within the state grant year. Hopefully, you know, it brings to mind some areas where, okay, well, I need to work on this during this time or that during the other time, or remind my students about this for this time. So that's pretty much state grant. I know that was pretty quick, but hopefully that gave you a good foundation and overview of the PA State Grant Program, a program that we're really proud of that allows us to give out, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars to needy Pennsylvania students. So as I mentioned before, one of the programs that we offer as a special program that in some way piggybacks off of the Pennsylvania State Grant Program is the Institutional Assistance Grants Program, or IAG. We have a lot of acronyms here at PHEAA. So IAG was one of those programs. It's still a relatively older program, started in the 1970s to basically support those institutions that are not included as line items in the Commonwealth budget. So, you know, for state-related and state-owned institutions, for community colleges, the funding does come directly from the Commonwealth to support them and make sure that, you know, costs kind of stay low and that, you know, they're able to keep the lights on. You know, IAG is the Keep the Lights On program. So for schools that don't meet that requirement, then we have IAG. So if it is a post-secondary institution in Pennsylvania that is a private nonprofit institution, then they can apply in order to receive IAG funds, which is us saying, hey, you know, keep the lights on and don't pass those charges on to the student, because there are our state grant students that attend your institution, and we can't necessarily have their or any other students' charges go up. Here's, you know, a little bit of funding from us to hopefully kind of keep things in balance as you go throughout the year. Now, the way, again, that we determine what funds go out to that particular institution is by the number of state grant students they have. So one of the key things here is keeping those state grant records up to date so that we know exactly how much funding in IAG that we should be sending, and that there's no funds returned, because we know how many state grant awarded students you have at your school. So there is a one per capita for every single full-time student. So we pay a certain amount for every single full-time student and then pay half the amount for every single half-time student as well. We try and give those funds as much as possible upfront so that you have the opportunity to work with them throughout the year. And we really are relatively flexible with how the funds are spent, but we do ask how the funds are spent. So there is some reporting for IAG that, lets us know, hey, look, here are rising costs in this area or that area, and it allows us to keep an eye on, essentially how IAG is used. So one of the things we always like to do is put in what the appropriation is or what the funding is on all of our programs, so you can see or get an idea of how big or how small this program is. And IAG for last year had over $26 million provided through the Commonwealth appropriation, and then an additional supplemental $5 million from the CARES Act. So that brings us to our next program. And feel free to stop me. I know we have a lot of stuff to go through today, but if you have any questions, put them in the chat. That way we can hopefully get any questions that you have answered. I know this is kind of like the highest level of overviews, but we did want all of you to have, some understanding of what it is, we do here. So the Higher Education for the Disadvantaged Students, or Act 101 program, is another one of those programs that are pretty close to our heart, because this program, which is one of the older programs that we also have, started in the 1970s to address some concerns within certain communities within Pennsylvania. We realized that there are certain students that are negatively impacted by socioeconomic situations that are occurring within our Commonwealth and within our nation, and we want to assist those students in not just getting into the institutions, those post-secondary institutions they want to attend, but transitioning to college life. Let's say if they come from a family that never or doesn't know anything about college life, also give them different kind of services that allow them to maintain their enrollment in their post-secondary institution and hopefully graduate from them. So the Act 101 program provides funding not to the students, but to institutions that are already providing services to at least 40 students that meet the definition of educationally and economically disadvantaged. So if the institution is already running a program like this, then we say, you know what, have some Commonwealth funds. Join us and we'll help you to help your students. And that's essentially what the Act 101 program does. We still do have about 30 plus institutions that participate, and all of our Act 101 directors, those who are, leading the charge on providing these services, are passionate individuals who, really do want the students at their institution to succeed, even when they have these social disadvantages. So similar to IAG, the Act 101 program is funded on a per capita basis. So depending on how many students the institution is serving, between 40 and a maximum of 300, then we will provide funding for each and every one of those students, and there will be, a little bit of funding for each. So again, this has to be a program that the institution is already offering, and we are supplementing with Commonwealth funds. So the institution will still be required to pay at least some portion of the Act 101 program on their end, and then, we provide the rest. Again, we also try and give the funding up front so that those services can be planned and offered throughout the year, and hopefully assist those students in maintaining enrollment and eventually graduating and achieving those goals. Now, when we're talking about the students themselves, there is no application process. The primary responsibility for running the program is on the institution, and the institution in certain ways gets to decide, okay, who would best be served at my institution by these funds, by these services. Primarily, students must be primarily students must be Pennsylvania residents, and with being Pennsylvania residents, they must meet the definition for educationally and economically disadvantaged. Now, economically disadvantaged students, that is a definition that we determine here at PHEAA. It is those students who have a household income of 200% of the poverty level or less. Now, we try and provide reporting of that information to the institutions so that they can then decide from that list of students which students are going to be educationally disadvantaged or at risk, those students who would not likely be able to attain and maintain at least a 2.0 GPA. So, we try our best to provide some examples within our guidelines. Maybe they're ESL students, maybe they're returning adult students, maybe the student was in the lower quartile of their graduating class or didn't have a certain GPA or SAT scores, but we leave that up to the institution to decide, hey, look, we're going to offer these services for you, and we're going to commit to you to give you those wonderful services to try and advance you through your education. So that brings us to the Pennsylvania Targeted Industry Program, which is our next program. This program is actually a student-facing program, and with the Pennsylvania Targeted Industry Program, it is what certain of us refer to sometimes as the kid sister of the Pennsylvania State Grant Program. So the PHEAA program, another one of our proud programs, is actually pretty newer. So this program was set forth through Act 82 of 2012, and it is a need-based program to provide funding for students in those shorter programs of study who are looking to get education and training to immediately go out into the workforce. And it is determined by, what is needed as far as the workforce in the Commonwealth is concerned. So we work directly with the Department of Labor and Industry, or L&I, to determine, hey, look, what jobs are going to be needed in the Commonwealth, and what are the programs of study that will lead to us being able to put people in those jobs. So right now, the fields of study are determined as health, energy, advanced materials and diversified manufacturing, and agriculture and food production. Now, we take a look at that with L&I to determine, we might need to make some adjustments to that, because most recently, I want to say a year ago almost, the field of health was added because, it was determined that we need people to be trained in those health fields. So kind of as a perspective for that whole kid sister of the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, as you can see, this program is funded at quite a bit of a lower level. $6.3 million were allocated in the 2021 year, which meant that we did have a few students who met eligibility requirements but were not able to be funded. But we're always proponents of seeing if maybe we can get additional funding for this program, because we feel it's very much needed. Institutions must submit an application annually. The annual application has been put out for those renewal schools and should be returned by October 31st for participation consideration. The application must accompany an eligibility and certification approval report, or ECAR, and allows us to determine whether or not the institution is offering programs that meet the requirements for the PA tip. So we're looking at programs that are Title IV eligible, at least 10 weeks long, but less than 2 academic years in length. These programs are not going to be state grant eligible, but they're going to be those little shorter programs that lead to, those or jobs in those fields. We have an entire list of programs that we have as eligible, and we use the list by the classification of instructional program, or SIP code. So programs on that list are likely to be able to be approved at participating institutions. Now, students similar to state grant, must be citizens or eligible non-citizens, high school graduates. They must be enrolled in an approved institution and an approved program of study. They must meet the Title IV academic progress considerations, have an EFC of $12,000 or less, and be enrolled in one of these approved program of study on a full-time basis unless they're enrolled at a nonprofit institution, then they can be at least half-time. Now, PHEAA is able to be issue funds for students who are already recipients of baccalaureate degrees. So if they're coming back to go to school and get some training in something specific to get back out there, then they could still receive PHEAA funds. We do have an annual minimum and maximum that we announce every year, and we've actually made a couple of changes to the way we calculate awards going forward for the 21-22 academic year. So we recently had a session on that. The recording of that session will be available probably in the next week or so. That way, if you are a PHEAA institution and you want to learn more about the changes we made for the upcoming year, then you can go to PHEAA.org and check out our webinars and see if you can find that recording. So our next program is the Ready to Succeed Scholarship Program, RTSS or RETS, and it's a program that kind of piggybacks on the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, but allows for students who don't necessarily meet the need requirement and fall into that middle income category to receive some funds as well. So these middle income students do need to meet a couple other requirements, including an achievement requirement, which includes a GPA that they have to meet. They also need to meet, even though they don't have that Pennsylvania State Grant need requirement, they have to be under a certain amount for their household income as well. A little bit of a smaller program, limited funding. We probably do have more students who are eligible for this program that can receive funds. So, this is one of the ones that we're always a strong proponent of, increasing the amount for the appropriation. But, situation is as it is currently. We try our best to, provide financial aid funding to these particular students so that they can help stay out of significant student loan debt. Now, institutions to participate in this particular program, they must be PA State Grant approved by June 30th of the academic year prior to the one we are going to be issuing funds for. They must be an institution that's headquartered and domiciled. They must also submit the one-time application by the deadline. And again, students have to be in those families that have an income of $110,000 or less. They have to have at least one academic year under their belt and a cumulative GPA of at least 3.25. Now, the RETS program is dispersing funds in conjunction with the PA State Grant Program. So in order to receive RTSS, in addition to meeting the other requirements, a student cannot have over $1,501 in state grant funding to receive RETS because the minimum amount that they must be able to receive is $500. So since we disperse it in conjunction with state grant, they can't have too high a state grant award in order to get RETS funds. Historically, and most likely this year as well, the maximum for RETS is $2,000. Again, RETS is limited funding. Funds are issued on a first come, first served basis by the date that the eligible student had submitted their FAFSA. And so that moves us to the Pennsylvania Blind or Deaf Higher Education Beneficiary Grant, or BDBG program. And BDBG is one of our oldest programs, if not the oldest program that we administer here. It is one of our smaller programs, and it is, as you can tell, designed to serve students who have disabilities for hearing or sight. Now, with the BDBG program, Students must apply on an annual basis. They need to file that FAFSA and complete the student application by the deadline. The deadline for BDBG applications is March 31st, which is pretty far out there for some of our applications, but it gives, students who have disabilities the most time to submit their applications. And the first-time application must be certified medically, either by the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation or, by a medical doctor. The award maximum for BDBG is $500, so it's pretty small, but, from what I've heard from students, it's pretty significant. This is one of the only awards that we allow for students to take out of state. They can go to any institution and still be awarded BDBG. And that brings us to the final program that I was going to be talking through today, which is the PHEAA Education and Training Grant, or PHEAA ETG program. Now, PHEAA ETG is actually a federally funded program. And basically what happens with PHEAA ETG, it was provided under the Promoting Safe and Stable Families and the Family First Prevention Services Act. And the funding is federal funding that is divided amongst the states. So PHEAA is only going to be eligible for our Pennsylvania students because in Michigan there is a Michigan PHEAA ETG. And essentially the funding goes directly to the Department of Human Services, who we work jointly together to determine student eligibility. We get about $1.6 million, and that's been relatively steady for the allotment for PHEAA ETG. Again, we partner with DHS in order to determine which students are able to receive funding for this, because this particular education training grant provides assistance to undergraduate students who have aged out of foster care. So we're looking to help those kids who don't necessarily have the family income to assist them in attending post-secondary institution. A very vulnerable population, I must say, but they can get up to $5,000 a year in order to attend a post-secondary institution of their choice. Again, PHEAA ETG is for those students who have aged out of foster care, who have not yet reached age 26, and who are not in default or owing in any Title IV aid. They, in general, must be at least half-time, attending a Title IV institution, have submitted an application, or have had a renewal application submitted from receiving PHEAA ETG eligibility in the prior year. But essentially, we're trying our best to give out funds to students who have aged out of foster care. Now, within the last year, there has been some additional funding provided to the PHEAA program, which we consider December X, or the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And this allowed for students who are already in this vulnerable population to, like the rest of us, receive kind of stimulus funding. So there were some additional funds available for them for the 2021 and 21-22 years, and it allowed us to relax some of those initial eligibility criteria. So we weren't checking the students for academic progress, or we were asking schools not to check the students for academic progress. We waived that particular criteria. We also, upped everybody's award to the maximum value that they could receive, up to $5,000 a year, even for those students who had less than half-time enrollment. So, we're still working with schools in order to, evaluate the best way to spend the Division X funding, because we do want the students to have money in hand. We're asking that for, the foster ed waiver program, which Ashley will be talking about next, that you allow students to have a little bit of extra money in their pockets, because, we've all been negatively impacted by the recent changes in our world, and that stimulus money would help them to be able to do stuff like, find permanent housing, or whatever it is that they would need to do in order to continue their education. So I'm going to right now turn things over to Ashley, who's going to kick things off with our next program.
All right, the sliding of the chairs. So, like Rita said, next up here we want to talk just a little bit about our Fostering Independence Through Education tuition waiver, otherwise known as our foster ed program. So, I think the big thing to understand when we talk about foster ed is that, in its own way, it's sort of designed to be an offshoot, if you will, of what the CHAFE program was. So this program is one of the two new programs that we've been juggling this past year or so. So spending some time getting it up off the ground once it was officially put into legislation in 2019, but then, working with our partners to figure out what exactly, technology-wise and even policy-wise we wanted this program to look like. So then we officially kind of rolled things out the door for foster ed in the 2021 award year, and we've sort of been running off ever since. So again, what I said, or sort of what Rita and I have both said so far, is that this program, again, is really designed to assist those students that are foster youth here in Pennsylvania, and knowing, again, that this is probably one of the most vulnerable populations that we all perhaps encounter or work with, that they need some additional support. So they need some additional support when it comes to the financial aid side of the house. They need some additional support with regard to perhaps, community services that may be available, or even just someone to help them navigate the entire process, or kind of navigate things a little bit differently when it comes to life. So this program specifically works to remove some of those barriers for students, and first and foremost, offers them a waiver. So when we talk about this program being a waiver, what we mean is that this stems from institutional dollars. So you'll see that sort of final bullet point that we have there is just mentioning that there is no Commonwealth appropriation for our foster ed program. So when it comes down to identifying a student who's eligible, and we'll talk about some of those things here in a moment, but then the ultimate responsibility for waiving the tuition and mandatory fees only comes back to your institution. So there will be no PHEAA disbursement, there will be no Commonwealth, disbursement. Again, it all comes 100% out of your institutional funds. So I think the other thing to point out when we're talking about the waivers is just that, again, it applies to tuition and mandatory fees. However, other expenses like room, board, and non-mandatory fees, so maybe things like parking fees, ad drop fees, what have you, those things aren't necessarily covered. Now, your institution certainly has, the choice to decide if you want to go a step further and assist these students and waive some of these additional elements, but under the legislation, you are not required to do so. But again, it is certainly an institutional choice if you want to extend a little further behind, or I should say above those required items. And then the second thing that the foster ed program does is kind of, what I said, in that trying to offer these students some support systems or some resources that they can turn to as they start to navigate post-secondary ed. So it reduces loan indebtedness with the waiver element, and it, again, offers those students that overall network of support. So kind of looking here just quickly at some of the institutional side of things. So I think sort of the first thing to kind of point out here is that when the legislation was first put into place, it didn't necessarily carve out, what types of institutions had to participate or would be required to participate. So from our standpoint, we've sort of taken things as it is up to your institution to determine if this is a program that is applicable to you. It's not a decision that we can make here at PHEAA, but again, ultimately one that you would need to make in consultation with counsel at your institution. But for the most part, the legislation is kind of wide-ranging. So what we've seen so far is that most schools in the Commonwealth are applicable, or would be potential participants, if you will, if they had eligible students. So again, we're looking at schools here in the Commonwealth that have federal Title IV eligibility. And one of the other unique items that comes under the foster ed program is this notion that your institution has to designate someone to be the POC, or the point of contact. So again, kind of talking about what this program was designed to do, really trying to find that person or find that way in which students can get that additional support, have someone they can turn to, start to build this network on your campus or in your community. So that's sort of the first role that the POC kind of steps in to help the student with. So the POC is the individual who would assist the student in the application process, maybe to your institution, maybe assist them in trying to understand what other community resources may be available. So things like, transitional housing, maybe medical insurance, food services, whatever the case may be, the POC could help the student in that regard. They also have the responsibility of assisting the student in establishing their foster ed eligibility. So one of the things, again, that we'll touch upon a little bit on the next slide, but just is that as you know, students apply, we'll do our part in screening them and determining whether or not they're eligible. But in the off chance that when we do that review and we don't believe that the student is eligible, and even after checking with DHS, we don't think the student is eligible, the POC can step in or should step in and ultimately work with the student to see if there is some other way that the student can establish eligibility under one of the different avenues. So maybe the POC and the student contact the student's, home county and figure out if there's any documentation there. Maybe they follow up with some court-appointed advocates that the student had worked with previously. So there's a couple of different ways in which the POC kind of comes to the table to be, again, that first line or that first resource for students in navigating post-secondary plans. The other quick point I will make about the POC is just that, again, it is a requirement. It was written into the legislation, so it's not necessarily a PHEAA-driven item, but again, a legislative item. But the biggest thing you would just want to make sure that for your particular institution that you have identified a POC and you have this person publicly listed on your institution site. Again, ultimately realizing that the POC is going to be that first line or that first resource for students who potentially qualify under this program. Having the information publicly visible only helps your students to maybe focus on or identify the specific individual on your campus that they should reach out to. We don't determine where the POC resides. So for some institutions, we've seen that the POC is someone in the financial aid office. Other institutions, the POC is someone from student services. Other institutions, maybe it's someone from the admissions team. So again, 100% up to your school to decide who the POC is. Just make sure that you have someone, you have that person publicly listed, and then again, they can kind of fill in from there and assist the students accordingly. So I won't read through all of these student eligibility items, but the gist of this is that it's pretty similar to CHAFE. So all of the things that Rita kind of went through, and we even presented for the most part on the CHAFE slides leading up to this, all of them pretty much apply for foster ed. So everything down to like the application that students complete, it's the same for both CHAFE and foster ed. The renewal process for both that's in place for CHAFE will also be in place for foster ed. One of the biggest differences will be the application deadline, and I'll mention that here on the next slide. But before we advance to that slide, just want to point out that there will be an award counter under this program. So even though we're in our inaugural year, pretty much we're wrapping up our initial year of this program, going forward, students will have this award counter that's in place. So in about 5-6 years here, we'll start to see students who have exhausted their foster ed eligibility, but again, certainly haven't had that this initial year since we just kicked things off the ground. So a couple other points here with regard to foster ed before we talk about some of our matching funds program. Mentioned already that the eligibility items are the same down to the application, so that completing of the FAFSA as well as the CHAFE application. But again, as I mentioned, the biggest difference between CHAFE and foster ed is going to be the application deadline. So understanding that foster ed has a summer component, unlike CHAFE, we give students a little additional time. So in order for students to apply and possibly receive eligibility for foster ed, they have until May 1 to submit that application. Whereas again, the CHAFE deadline is, about 4 or 5 months preceding this. We give students a little bit more time, just realizing that some students may decide they don't want to enroll until the summer, so they, want to spend the time kind of getting their ducks in a row, and we give them a chance to still apply and obtain a waiver potentially then for the summer. One other point to make with regard to the CHAFE and foster ed kind of differences is that the student does not necessarily have to be CHAFE ETG eligible. So, talked a little bit, as we were going through this, that, with CHAFE being an allocation, if you will, that we do always run the risk of exhausting all of our funds. So certainly that was a scenario that we encountered this year just because we've seen an increase in the number of students applying for CHAFE just because of the foster ed program being introduced. So students don't necessarily have to have a one-for-one, meaning if they're getting CHAFE ETG, they also automatically get foster ed, or that, they cannot get foster ed if they're not getting CHAFE ETG, because there will certainly be some differences. So for example, things like if students have exhausted their CHAFE ETG counter, that does not preclude them from having foster ed eligibility. Could also see a scenario where maybe those application differences or those application deadlines kind of come to the table where students applied late for CHAFE, but they still had time to apply for foster ed, so they're still potentially eligible or would be considered for foster ed there. So Again, not always a one-to-one. We kind of evaluate eligibility for the two programs separately, but they share so many of the same eligibility items and even application methods that sometimes that line does get crossed, but they are two totally separate programs, and it's not always going to be a one-to-one with regard to student eligibility. Same other notes here that were kind of mentioned on the Chafee slide. So just being an undergraduate student has to stay in Pennsylvania, though, for foster ed, which is another place in which the two programs differ, because students can take Chafee funds out of state pretty much anywhere in the country. Foster ed, though, is only for schools located here in Pennsylvania. And then just sort of jumping down here towards the bottom, talked already a little bit just about the fact that there is a summer component for foster ed. And then by far, probably one of the most common questions we get about foster ed is whether or not there is a minimum or maximum amount that must be waived, and the answer is no. So understanding that no two students may have the exact same kind of financial aid package or financial aid picture, that these waiver amounts could vary. So, some students may have a waiver upwards of, tens of thousands or however many dollars, and then other students could have a waiver as small as $100 or $75, what have you. So again, essentially no minimum, no maximum. It is just what happens, or I should say what the result is after all of the institutional aid or, any of the federal and state aids have been applied to the student account. What's remaining is kind of then what gets subject to waiver, aside from those things that are not required to be included. So taking a quick peek here at some of our matching funds programs. So in short, we have these 4 programs that come to us from the Commonwealth, and they all sort of get lumped together, if you will, as a matching funds block or a matching funds grant. And pretty much what it means for them to be a matching funds grant is that there's some element of the program that has a match element to it, that has a match piece to it. So these programs kind of have 2 objectives, the first of which is supporting our schools that have federal work study and helping them to meet those match requirements that are in place on the federal side. And we'll talk a little bit more about those 2 here as well. But then the second component, or the second objective of the matching funds program is to try and leverage some of these private scholarships and these private organizations that are already supporting our students to figure out, is there a way that we can match or contribute to what it is that you're doing, and ultimately boost the package or boost the financial aid offerings that are available then to the student. So each of these programs sort of has its own objective and kind of its own way in which it works. And again, we'll talk a little bit about each one here as we go through. The final kind of overall note to make about the matching funds program is, as I said, they come to us as one big block of funds, and then it's ultimately up to PHEAA to determine how we're going to divvy each of these programs or set an individual allocation for each program. So for 2021, the Commonwealth offered $13.1 million for these 4 programs. And then once we do get that, amount in from the legislature, our PHEAA Board of Directors will go through each one of these programs and try and set an individual allocation based upon what the needs are for that particular program. So they'll take a look at the allocation as a whole, and then take a look at what our participation has been across community service, on campus, state work study, and then past, look at how many students are being served, and then kind of look at prior year's data just to see where our spending maybe has fluctuated and what we can do perhaps in anticipation of a boom in maybe one program versus another. But we'll talk a little bit more about those allocations for each here. So first up, we'll talk just about the 2 federal work study programs, and then we'll jump into the 2 student-facing programs. So first up here, we just have FWS On or On Campus. And as I'm sure this topic has come up maybe at least once, if not more than that, during the course of your training here this week. But this is a federal program, and under the federal work study program, you all have a requirement, if you're a participant, to match or contribute towards what's going on for that particular program. So what the Commonwealth does is it says, okay, we recognize you have this match requirement, let's help. So the Commonwealth, again, set aside some money for this particular element, and then we here at PHEAA, after getting that allocation from the Commonwealth and taking a look at all the other programs, we determined that in order to support institutions that were participating in FWS On for the 2021 year, that we would need to allocate about $7.5 million of that $13 million that we got for this particular program. So of the 4 programs that are in that matching funds block, this is by far the program that kind of has the greatest resource and sort of has one of the greatest needs. So that's been honestly pretty steady across the board for the past few years here, but certainly we know that trends could change. So from an institutional standpoint, participation in federal work study is probably the easiest when it comes to everything that we administer here at PHEAA. Pretty much you just have to be receiving FWS funds from the Department of Ed, be located in Pennsylvania, and have Title IV eligibility, and submit 2 reports to us all year long. The first report is an application, and then the second report comes at the end of the year, and it's pretty much you telling us that you spent the funds or how you spent the funds, and that's really it. So to determine allocations, we have a little bit of information there along the bottom, and it's pretty much the same process that the board uses when they set those individual program allocations. We do a very similar process then to determine what each individual school's amount would be that we would disperse. And so in large part, again, we're really trying to make sure that we can help you all in meeting what that match requirement is for your particular institution. So again, those amounts that are given to institutions may vary between year to year and certainly between schools that are participating in the program. And then the community service program, I think the best way to summarize this is that it looks and it functions almost exactly like the on-campus program. Biggest difference being is just the allocation. So community service, we haven't had as big of a sort of boom or participation, if you will, but we still set aside about $1 million for this particular program to help you all with targeting those community service positions for your students. Same participation requirements that were in place for ON exist for CS, and then again, kind of the same process that we use in determining what the school's individual allocation will be each year. So again, certainly could vary between years. So taking a peek here then at our third program of the 4 that are in our matching funds block, it's going to be our Partnerships for Access to Higher Education, otherwise known as our PATH program. So this is probably one of the more common programs that I imagine that many of you will certainly experience this program at some point, whether or not you work directly with it. I'm sure you may have a student or two over the years that may qualify for this particular one. But this program came to us in 1989, originally as a match grant program, but in 1996, it went through a little bit of a revamp, if you will, and it came out with a new name. So it came out with that Partnerships for Access to Higher Education program, and we renamed the program more so to really try and emphasize and or almost even capitalize on these partnerships that we knew were happening throughout the Commonwealth. So again, we could really leverage all of these resources that were being offered to our students and find a way to, again, ultimately boost what the student walks away from that particular scenario with. So with this program, we partner with about 40 different partners across the Commonwealth, so community-based organizations that, again, are already offering some amount of private scholarships to students, and we say, okay, you know what, let's match it. So students can really come out of this particular program with a nice boost, if you will, in their overall aid. And then along the bottom there, we just have a quick mention of what the allocation was for 2021, so about $2.6 million. Again, this is one that stayed relatively consistent over the years, but again, certainly based upon future demands, we may see an adjustment in that allocation for this particular program. So a little bit here about our partners. Just want to share this in large part because we are always looking for new partners. So if you know of an organization in your area that certainly fits the bill for this because they're already offering some scholarships, they're already a nonprofit or a public charity, so they're already doing all this same work that the program's designed to do, send them our way, or have them reach out to us, because again, we're always looking for opportunities to really take what's already being offered to our students and again try to double it if we can. So we have some information available on our website for our partners. We even have a list on our website of who all of our partners are, so if you're not sure if there's a partner in your region, you can certainly check out our website to find out if there is. Our partner list, we do keep updated throughout the year, so we'll normally update it around the fall, if you will, but certainly if we have a change or we welcome a new partner midway through the year, we would communicate that information on our site. That way students and you all know that we do have some new participants in our program. One other point to make with regard to the partners is, so, we kind of talked a moment ago at a high level anyway, that for this particular program, there's about $2.6 million that's set aside. But then what we do is once we get that $2.6 million, we look at all of the 40 partners that are participating, and we look at all of the students that they intend to nominate for the program for the upcoming year. And then we issue each partner an allocation to say, okay, PHEAA organization, you're one of our PATH partners, we're going to put $50,000, out here for you all, and then we're going to use that $50,000 to sort of match all of the students that are on your list based upon what you said you're offering to them as a scholarship, sort of sorting those students based on those that have the greatest amount of need. And then once we sort of work through that particular organization's list, we sort of stop. And then once we get to the end of the year, or once we get through a point where all of the organizations we've awarded as many students as possible, we put all the funds back in the pot, and then we say, okay, who's left? And then we try to continue awarding as many students as possible. So I shared that particular point just because it's one of the times or one of the ways in which institutions may see a change in their students that were eligible, and it kind of makes them feel like they got off track or they missed something, and it may not necessarily be the case, but more so just our effort of trying to keep working with our partners to match as many students as possible as we go throughout the year to spend all of that $2.6 million that we've set aside, and again, make sure that their scholarships they are already offering do get matched. So a couple points here about students, and then we'll look at our final matching funds program. Biggest thing for past students or past recipients is to make sure that they are state grant eligible. So if they are not state grant eligible, then they cannot be PATH eligible. They also have to be nominated by a partner, and then they have to have a state grant award for that same term in which they're receiving partner funds. So when you think about it, and I think, sort of the thing that starts to emerge here as we look at all of these programs is that there's really a lot of opportunities for students, between all these PHEAA administered programs to bundle as many as possible. So you look at a program like PATH, where students are getting, not only with the private scholarship or the private organizations offering them, they're getting the potential Commonwealth match, and then they already have to be state grant eligible. So there's an additional, resource on top of that. And then that doesn't include anything else that they can continue to stack on top of that, whether it be things like CHAFE or maybe RTSS, what have you. So again, really a number of opportunities for students under all of these programs, honestly. And then the final point for PATH there is just a little bit about the minimum and maximum award amounts. So the minimum is going to be $200, and then the max will be $300. In certain circumstances, we certainly may see partners that offer a scholarship that's more than this $3,000. It's just that from the match component, we kind of cap it at $3,000. Again, trying to make sure that we can help as many students as possible that may be on a particular partner's list. So the final program that we have here in our matching funds block is our state work study program. And this is another one of those programs where, again, we're leveraging what's going on in the community already and trying to figure out ways that we can kind of support that local economy and make that overall, again, investment back into that particular community and support, different businesses or sectors, if you will, here in the Commonwealth. So this program, I think, kind of as the name implies, is designed to help students get some work study experience. So in all honesty, I'm sure we all know plenty of students that could benefit from some work study, before they prepare to enter into the workforce. Another kind of note to share here, and it's one that we do have listed, and this is sort of a pat on the back for us, but our program here in the Commonwealth was pretty much the first in the nation of its kind. So we were the first one when this program was created in the 1980s, I want to say, to offer these off-campus referral systems and kind of put processes in place to try and get students to connect with some of these community employers and take advantage of some of the opportunities that employers may already have, and start to build that network or build that relationship that in many cases panned out for students and turned into additional opportunities. So again, as the sort of slide indicates here, we're partnering with community organizations as well as post-secondary institutions to administer and offer these experiences. So I will say between the two community organizations and post-secondary institutions, we have a really good blend or a really good balance of the number of schools and organizations that are participating. But again, as always, we're always looking for any new ones. So if you know of any community organizations or maybe your own campus could benefit from, one or two state work study students, certainly an opportunity for you to sign up here as we get ready for the upcoming year. We do reimburse under this particular program. So how this works is that, as a participating institution or organization, they would pay, the full wages that the student earned, and then there's a reimbursement that happens on the back end. So for those that are nonprofit, we reimburse or we split the bill down the middle, but then those that are for-profit, it's a 60-40 split, so we would reimburse 40%, and then that particular entity would pay 60%. So again, it's a very attractive program for, students as well as for organizations, because this organization is getting some support, they're, getting their name out there, getting that exposure, the students getting the experience, and then again, for the employer, they're getting some kind of reimbursement, so they're not carrying this entire bill on their own. And then there along the bottom, we just have some allocation information for this program. So this one's kind of in the middle there with regard to the for and the matching funds block. So some information here about our state work study employers. Certainly won't go through all of this in great detail. I'm just trying to be mindful of our time. But again, if you know of any organizations in your area or maybe even your institution that thinks you might be a good fit for our state work study program, without a doubt, encourage you to get in contact with us. At this point, you still have plenty of time to apply, especially for the upcoming academic year. So even if you decide you only want one work study student, that's fine. You're helping a student out in the Commonwealth to gain some real world experience, but you can find tons of information or even direct potential employers to our website because we do have a host of resources out there for them as well. And then from the student side here, to wrap up our state work study information, so graduate and undergraduate students are eligible. So again, one of few programs where graduate students do have an opportunity to participate or take advantage of this financial aid. So from an undergraduate standpoint, again, they have to be state grant eligible. And so if they do not meet all of those requirements that Rita talked about, from academic progress to approved program of study, then they cannot be considered for state work study. They also have to submit an application. On the graduate side, remembering or understanding that graduate students are not afforded Pennsylvania state grants, it all comes back to whether or not they have unmet need. If their financial aid office certifies they have unmet need, they are fine with us. They will just need to make sure they're a PA resident and do the application, and they too can participate in the state work study program. Final note here is just about the awarding. So I know you kind of look at that $10,000 figure and it's like, whoa, what, really? How? So how this works pretty much for state work study is that that $10,000 is the student's total award across the entire award year. So between the academic year and the summer. So $5,000 for the academic year is sort of the max, and then $5,000 for the summer term. And then the amounts there are essentially, what an employer can submit to us for reimbursement. But I think it's also important to note, because we do see this with some of our employers, that students can potentially earn way more than this. This is just sort of what PHEAA caps it at in terms of our reimbursement to the employer. But if an employer chooses to pay the student well above the minimum wage, and the student works for, a reasonable amount of hours, again, students can certainly earn more than that. This figure is just more so what we reimburse from the PHEAA standpoint. So that is it for our matching funds program. I'm going to take a quick look here at some of our programs that are designed more so for our veterans and their families. The first of which is another one of those programs that at some point I imagine many of you all will have some experience with, and that is our EAP program, or our Educational Assistance Program. So with EAP, we work hand in hand with the Pennsylvania National Guard in administering this program. But the thing with EAP, and even the next program that we'll talk about, pretty much the DMVA takes the charge, or they take the lead in administering this program. We're more so of a kind of secondary partner when it comes to it, which is a little bit of a different role considering all the other partnerships we talked about with every other program. And we have more of that primary role, but when it comes to this one and MFEP, we're a little bit of a secondary partner. So for the EAP program, the DMVA will receive the appropriation from the Commonwealth. They handle all the applications as far as distributing and collecting them. They make the determination as to whether or not students are eligible. And again, more so from our standpoint, we manage some of the technology pieces, and then we do the dispersing that happens then to you all on the post-secondary side. So we'll talk a little bit about MFEP, but just to mention, so these two programs are very closely linked, kind of have that same partnership or that same relationship that like Foster Ed and Chafee has. MFEP and EAP have one that's almost exactly like it, just a little bit of a different spin. But we'll talk a little bit about that one here too. So from the EAP standpoint, for institutions, not necessarily an application, if you will, that you have to do. Is just more so, this program kind of follows the dollars. So the student, or excuse me, I should say the institution where the student's attending, that sort of just, what happens. So it's not like what we've seen under like PA TIP, where your school has to apply. More so for EAP, if you're located in Pennsylvania and you've maybe had prior eligibility, or you'll go through a PHEAA approval process if you've never participated in anything, in which case it's just us collecting more so some like banking information so we can disperse. That's more or less of what our approval process is for for schools that have never participated. From the student standpoint or from the service member side, the biggest thing with EAP is that, the service member is signing a 6-year service agreement with the Pennsylvania National Guard. And in the event that they don't complete that service obligation, then this is one of the few programs we have where the grant will actually convert to a loan that then gets serviced by AES. So we see, certainly a handful of service members that do convert, but it's not the overwhelming majority, as many of them do actually follow through and complete that 6-year service agreement, in part because then it helps them when it's time for the MFEP side that we'll talk about here in a minute. So a couple other points here for EAP. Student has to complete an application by the deadline that is set by the National Guard. Again, if students are looking for that application, they have to go back to the National Guard or go back to their unit of assignment. You will never find like student applications listed on PHEAA.org in the same way that you find them for all of our other programs. Everything, again, is going to be sort of, initiated or started with the Guard. Students also have to do a promissory note, again, just with this being a grant to loan program. Certainly want to iron out who's going to be the responsible party in the event that this does convert. The student does not have to be a member of, does not have to be a resident of Pennsylvania. They also do not have to do the FAFSA or complete the state grant form, and even no staff requirement. And those 3 things or 4 things alone are something that's totally different when you think about everything else that we administer here. These 4 kind of pretty much fly in the face of everything else. So certainly an important note with regard to the EAP program. And then students can use these awards for both graduate and undergraduate education. And then this particular slide here talks a little bit about the awarding process. It's all numbers, so I'll spare us that on a Friday afternoon, but certainly encourage you to check this out. If you do maybe have an EAP student, in the future, maybe you had one previously and just want to know a little bit more about it. The short version of all this is that, the EAP award is going to be the lesser of the student's tuition plus technology fees, or whatever the PHEAA annual tuition amount is. So again, we kind of outline on this slide the different ways that awards are calculated, because it's not set in stone like what we've seen under, programs like State Grant or even PHEAA or REC or even BDBG. This one could certainly vary between students just based upon what their tuition and fees are and, what then that PHEAA amount is. So again, not set in stone for all students, but certainly encourage you to check this out then. And then the other program that sort of shares a familial relationship, if you will, with EAP is going to be the MFEP program, or the Military Family Education Program. And this program was that second new program that we've been working with or working on since it was first put into legislation in 2019. So you'll remember that when I kind of started talking about foster ed and said that, we had 2 new programs, well, this one was the second. So we were quite busy in that 19-20 year trying to stand up 2 new programs and keep everything else afloat. But with this particular program, it was sort of known as the Pennsylvania GI Bill, because it was the Commonwealth's way of saying, hey, we recognize that these service members have, made this sacrifice for, our Commonwealth and for our country. Let's do something to help them back, or let's do something to support their family, because not only when, a service member enlists do they have their family support, that, it's kind of like, let's show them that we care and we appreciate also that they too, made this sacrifice to support their service member, and, some additional things there. So with this particular program, it sort of starts with the service member. So the service member, has to complete that first, 6-year agreement that we kind of talked about under EAP. But then if they make the decision to re-enlist, then that sort of opens up the gates, if you will, for them to have MFEP, extended to their dependents. So with this, again, there's that additional 6-year commitment with the National Guard after they complete the first piece. If they do not complete that full 6-year second, commitment, then this is another one of those that could potentially convert to a loan. So, there will be the promissory note that needs to be done during the application piece. But again, it sort of starts with the service member deciding that they want to re-enlist for an additional 6 years. And then once they do complete that, then again, this is when sort of these benefits are afforded then to their dependents. So I'll sort of jump down to the bottom of this slide here, because this is sort of a key element, if you will, with regard to understanding and knowing a little bit about MFEP. So the service member is the first person, or I should say, or is the authority or has the responsibility for determining who or which of their dependents receive any of these MFEP benefits. So it's not like every other program where pretty much if the student applies, they can be considered and, hopefully determined eligible. For MFEP, the service member has to decide that of, my spouse and my dependents or my children, who do I want to actually receive, this particular award? So the service member could decide that they want to only afford it to one person. They can also make changes to it. So, they could say that for one particular year, I want to extend this benefit to my spouse. And then in subsequent years, you know what, I want to change this and extend it now to my 3 children, or I want to divvy it up amongst all 4 of these individuals. But it is 100% pretty much at the service member's discretion as to how they want to allocate this benefit. The other thing that's super different about MFEP is that when we look at the benefit that gets assigned, it's done in credits. So, the service member is going to be afforded 120 credits. And then, as I said, they can say that I want to take 30 of these credits and offer them to my spouse, take another 30 credits and offer them to, child 1, another 30 credits offer to child 2, and then I'm going to save the rest for something else. It is, again, 100% up to the service member. They work with the National Guard to determine how they want to assign these benefits in part. So, again, it's certainly important in that, students do understand that, while you may be receiving this benefit next year, it is perhaps not guaranteed in subsequent years. It just, again, depends on the service member and how they choose to perhaps adjust it if they do. So no application for you all on the institution side. Students, again, have to have benefits assigned. They'll need to do an application with the National Guard. So again, they kind of control that entire application and determination of eligibility on the DMVA side. There is a clock, though, however, as to when the spouse or the children must use the benefit. So the spouse of the service member has 6 years from the time that the service member leaves the National Guard, and then children have to use the benefit before age 26. Not required to be a Pennsylvania resident if you are a dependent, so whether you're the spouse or the child. And then again, no formal staff requirements. So when we think about just the fact that those 120 credits as they're assigned by the service member can fluctuate, again, super important that students understand that, you're not necessarily guaranteed to receive this in future years. So let's make the most of this while we can, while we do have this benefit, and actually make progress towards the credential they're pursuing. And then this is another one of those number slides, so I won't go through all of this, but again, just talks a little bit about how awards are determined for MFEP. They vary just a little bit from what happens on the EAP side, and it's in large part due to how graduate awards are calculated. So for MFEP, graduate awards are just going to match what the enrollment is, whereas on the EAP side, there is a cap for the part-time for graduate students. But again, certainly something you can check out and, do the math later if you are interested. So final 2 programs just to talk about here from the military standpoint, and I'm going to pick up my pace here because I think we're running a little bit long. So we have our PHEAA program and our Act 105 program. So PHEAA essentially works with those children whose parents have given their lives in the line of duty to offer these students a waiver as well. So again, when we say it's a waiver, there is no Commonwealth disbursement, there is no PHEAA disbursement. All of this comes 100% from the institution's resources. But the big difference with PHEAA compared to the other waiver we talked about is that PHEAA is a waiver across the board. So it's a waiver of tuition, mandatory fees, room, and board, whereas with foster ed, it was just tuition and mandatory fees. PHEAA waives everything. So some student eligibility items here, as we mentioned, these are just children that are either by birth or adoption of a service member who pretty much gave their life in the line of duty effective with January 1, 1976. And then this was extended to include those sheriffs and deputy sheriffs and a host of other individuals who died as a direct result of their official capabilities or their official duties after September 11th. And I'll also point out here the big thing with PHEAA is that it's only for select institutions. So all of those institutions that are pretty much a line item in the governor's budget. So the PA community colleges, state-related and state-owned institutions are the only ones that will ever see PHEAA recipients. All of our private schools and, business, trade, and technical schools, nursing schools, what have you, they are pretty much exempt from PHEAA as it only focuses on these three institutional types. And then Act 105 kind of works in a very similar way as PHEAA, but pretty much it extends into the spouse. So, again, just recognizing that the military or veterans member may have passed away in the result of their official duties. So, your spouse, we want to offer something to that individual as well to support them. So again, no disbursement that happens. It is one waiver. This one does expand the eligible pool of the institutions to include a few others, but spouses do have 10 years pretty much to use the benefit or until they remarry or whichever would occur first. And then next program here, won't talk about this one a whole lot. We slide it into the slide deck just because it is one that could pop up, as you're working with your particular programs or students at your school. So we insert it in here just more so as a resource. That way you have a place that you can refer back to if you do need to know a little bit more about the next program. The other thing to remember with the next program is that this is one of the reasons why your students could not have maybe state grant eligibility if they're in a defaulted status. So again, another reason why we insert it, just so you have a little bit of foundational information on it. And then the final program here, and I will certainly talk through this one at a very high level because I imagine this one came up at some point here, and that's just the TEACH program. So we here in State Grant Special Programs work with the TEACH program when it's still in that grant phase, but once it converts to a loan, then it goes over to the Fed loan side of our house. So again, I imagine you guys talked a little bit about this, I'm sure, at least one time over the course of the last week here, but the TEACH program essentially offers grants to students who want to begin teaching as a qualified teacher or a highly qualified teacher in a low-income field, a low-income elementary school, secondary school, and in a high-need field. So recipients do have to certify their teaching service within a designated time frame. We have forms available on My Fed Loan. That way students can find those forms that they may need for certification. And then just to share some resources here. So first and foremost, just making sure you all know about everything that's available on PHEAA.org. Certainly a wealth of resources that are out there, so I encourage you to explore our website and connect with us and, take advantage of everything that's out there. We also have some training events, so there are some that we are actually in the midst of doing right now. So if you will be working with the state grant program at your institution, definitely encourage you to join Rita and I on Thursdays at 10 this summer as we talk more about the state grant program. During the fall, we'll even be doing some sessions on some of those other programs, so maybe you're not a state grant school, but you might be a TIP school or an EAP school perhaps. Again, we'll certainly love to share some other information via our PHEAA.org training site, probably in about the next 2 months or so as to what it is we plan to do in the fall. And then certainly want to shout out this fine group of individuals, and they are our school services team. So we have about 13 different access partners that work around the Commonwealth to be kind of that local or immediate resource for you all. So I imagine if you have not met the access partner for your particular school, you will at some point, because they make it a point to see everybody that's sort of assigned to their particular territory. So not only do they work with you all on the post-secondary side, but they work with secondary schools in trying to do financial aid nights and workshops. They even work with some of our community organizations and state representatives to offer events in that particular region, again, to make sure that students and families do know about all the services or all the resources that are available when it comes to PHEAA. And then just sort of end things here with our contact information. Certainly, encourage you to reach out to us, whether it's via email or, directing your students to us, or even connect with us socially. So we do put a lot on our different social pages, everything from, many videos that we put on YouTube about how students can kind of apply for the state grant, to, tweets that we may share on Twitter, or even just updates on Facebook about different events or, workshops, or even just nice things or cool things that are happening here within the PHEAA boundaries or the PHEAA doors, and then even some information on LinkedIn. So I know we sort of flew through all that, especially towards the end fast, but we got a little long, so sorry about that, Melissa and everyone. But gonna go ahead here and stop sharing.